want to thank you, Johnny, for sharing your very personal story with us. And I have to say that it's a story that I think resonates with me on many levels. I think there are many, many people who are suffering, as you have, certainly in the military, and those who have served. But your story is really emblematic of a crisis that we're dealing with across the spectrum. There are many, many faces of trauma. And actually, I'm one of them as well. So I've shared, I don't have a story that is as dramatic as yours. I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I'm one of those people that throughout a lifetime of just living has experienced many, many head traumas. My first head trauma was when I was 6 years old. I had a concussion. I literally ran into a wall. Because I'm blind in one eye, and I have no three-dimensional vision. And I was running, I was a child down a hallway, looking over my right shoulder, running away from this kid behind me, full speed. Never saw the wall. Ran straight into it. Out cold for I don't know how long. I woke up a couple hours later. I became conscious. That was the first trauma. A couple of years later, I was in high school. I was a swimmer, athletic. I got hit in the head by a fellow swimmer, almost drowned. So I got pulled out of the water, resuscitated, but no one noticed that that the reason I went down in the first place was because I hit my head. I was young, 16 years old, 17 years old. Took me to the ER. You're fine. Just, patch you up, send you home. Go to high school, go on to college. I'm athletic. I keep hitting myself on the head. I'm blind and white. I keep hitting myself on the head. Never even really took note of it. Just kept, pushing on. Never saw any real effects of it. Just kept pushing on. 4 years ago, I was home. I was just doing a simple task. I was picking up a very, very heavy box with books in it, and I picked it up with force because it was heavy, and I never saw the beam in my house, and I hit it head on, dead on. I got a detached retina in the eye that I can't see out of, thank goodness. So that was good. And I went to the hospital to deal with the eye. 6 months later, I'm forgetting where my car is. I don't know where it is. I'm walking around for hours, and I mean that, hours, crying, calling my husband, saying, I just don't know where I left this car. Realizing that I don't remember coming to the parking lot. I don't remember going on this trip. I don't remember returning any of it. It's all lost. It's 4 years ago. Telling people, I don't think things are right. Telling my best friend, telling my husband, you're just getting old. You're over 50 now, it's going to happen. It's dementia, whatever. We all lose our keys. We all lose our stuff. I know, I don't think this is the same thing. I can't remember words. I don't remember what to say. I get up on these stages, and I don't know what the next thing is that I'm supposed to talk about. And it's real. It's a real concern. Oh, you're fine, Magali. If you're a problem, forget it. And it went like that for another year. And one day I was running in the woods, a route that I did all the time, and I literally didn't know where I was. I just didn't know. Completely disorientation. All very clear signs, but no one ever diagnosed me. No one ever has diagnosed me. In fact, I'm telling you this story probably for the first time in totality. I've never really talked about it. I'm listening to you, and I'm realizing how brave it is to go out and say, I've experience this. I'm still high functioning. I'm still out here doing what I do, and I'm still going to continue doing what I do. And I think we all have to be brave enough to go out and tell these stories, because otherwise we keep going along thinking it's okay. I eventually recovered, I hope, most of my faculties, but probably not. Probably I'm on a journey, and probably the next time I hit my head, it's going to be worse. So I'm very energized to find a solution, and that's what my organization is about. Cohen Veterans Bioscience is an organization that I founded 5 or 6 years ago. I spun it out of Johnson & Johnson, where I had done R&D research for 12 years across the spectrum of CNS disorders, looking for solutions for brain disorders. I was always interested in the brain. I always thought it was fascinating, and I had encountered so many individuals with really traumatic diseases, schizophrenia, autism, and the rest. I wanted to do something about those disorders. And then I started working with the veterans population and individuals like Johnny with high potential, young people whose lives were being impacted, and I wanted to do something about it. And we were doing a lot of things in industry, but we weren't doing some very critical things in industry, and I thought that a nonprofit organization had a unique place to help. And so we founded Cohen Veterans Bioscience to really accelerate and fast-track the development of diagnostics and therapeutics across brain-related disorders, with a focus on veterans because of the generous philanthropy of Mr. Cohen, who wanted to see us find solutions for this population. And when you look at the scorecard here for 2019, we launched this focus on veterans in 2016. The scorecard has changed. When we started, that TBI column had zeros in it too. So we're making progress in traumatic brain injury. We're still where we were with PTSD. That scorecard says, where do we have validated and qualified biomarkers and diagnostics in this field? Where do we have therapeutics that are FDA approved? The last FDA approved compounds for PTSD were approved over 17 years ago, and we're still waiting for the next one. And we have nothing for mild traumatic brain injury and experiences like we have, so we're still waiting. That's the scorecard. On the diagnostic side for traumatic brain injury, it's exciting times. This last year and a half, we've seen 3 new aids in diagnostics approved by the FDA, and that's because of more than 10, maybe 20 years, I'm sure Ron will say, worth of work to get there. Pulling together the entire community to accomplish those goals, getting funding from the government, from the Department of Defense to support the science, the FDA's engagement to change how the framework of how they think about what a gold standard looks like in this field, and more, the technologies, the advancements. But this is just the beginning, and I think the tide has turned. I think there are very many promising new initiatives out there, efforts. The NRAP initiative has driven a lot of public-private partnership efforts, and these are starting to bear fruit. The Track TBI program is bearing fruit, Sensi has borne fruit. It's exciting. So I think we need to keep pushing forward. Ultimately, the goal is personalized and precision medicine therapeutics for these disorders. And in order to do that, we have to shift the paradigm of how we approach things in the first place. We always, historically in the medical field, look at things from the sickness model. You have a disorder, PTSD, you have an injury, you wait until you are sick before you intervene. But in the cases of our experiences, what if someone had intervened at day 1 so that we never developed the chronic effects of traumatic brain injury or PTSD? so that it didn't get worse, so that the next head trauma doesn't mean that I'm not going to be able to give this talk anymore. I think that in order for us to change the paradigm, we need to change our approach. And many of these disorders have been defined syndromically based on behavioral manifestations of disease classically. If you look at our current diagnostic criteria in both conditions, they're based on observation. We need to get beneath the surface and start looking at the molecular circuit-based reasons that these conditions are developing. And the way to do that is to start with genetics and the omics and start to build up computational models of these disorders. I believe we need to bring integrative knowledge together, and that computational modeling will help us see things that we otherwise cannot see individually. Our brains just cannot handle this type of complex data and seeing all of the different relationships, so we can avoid just focusing on one target, but thinking about the system as a whole. In PTSD, we've spent a lot of effort in the last several years drilling into the biology here, the genetics, the transcriptomics, the proteomic inflammasome parts of the disorder, and they're already starting to bear some fruit there. Our organization did not originally focus on traumatic brain injury as much because of all your efforts. There have been so many great pieces of work already done, we didn't think we could make meaningful change there. However, in the last year or so, we found ourselves being brought into this world because there's so much comorbidity between these conditions, and they cannot ignore one for the other. And so we're seeing there's overlap in mechanisms, we're seeing there's overlap in the population itself, and so we feel that we need to understand TBI as well and to engage with this community as well, and that's what we would like to do. In order to do that, as a nonprofit organization, we like to understand what are the root cause issues, what are the root cause challenges, what needs to be done, and what could we do that would be value added to what you've already been doing, to the efforts that are already underway. The purpose of the next few days is not only to understand what is the state of the science in traumatic brain injury, but to understand what needs to be done next and where can each of us contribute to that roadmap moving ahead. We want to do our part, and we will play our part there, hopefully, and we'll work with you and partner with you where we can. There are many, many different new technologies out there: neuroimaging, big data analytics, computational modeling, wearables, devices, nanotechnologies that could be brought to bear on this. And we've already established a number of programs and platforms that are utilizing those capabilities. We've applied them to the PTSD field. We're ready to leverage them now for traumatic brain injury as well. We have an early signal program, which is a wearables and digital health program, looking at how we can measure exquisitely biosignals in these populations. RapidDX is a public-private partnership program for diagnostics and biomarker discovery and validation. That work is in collaboration with the FDA, the DoD, the VA. We have programs in preclinical animal modeling to establish construct-valid models of these disorders and turning those into industrialized models that can be used by industry to screen therapeutics. We've established advanced computational modeling programs, Brain Commons, a place for data to be shared with the community, the research community at large. I'll show you that. And finally, we've established an incubator program to help speed and accelerate therapeutics development. That includes an adaptive platform trial study for PTSD, which will be launching next year. So this focus around PTSD can be leveraged for traumatic brain injury. We conducted a consensus workshop about 2 years ago now, looking at PTSD and identifying the priority areas, very much as we are going to do over the next few days here, identifying where are the gaps, how do we need to fill them, what is the context of use that's relevant to that particular population. And the consensus resulted in, first and foremost, we need to stratify and biotype PTSD and TBI. We need to parse this disease. It is heterogeneous. There is a spectrum of presentation, and we need to understand the differences across this population at the molecular and circuit-based level. To do that, we need to bring a lot of big data together, because these large studies that are being conducted now, when you start to parse it down to individual groups, we wind up with cell sizes that are too small to drive power and to drive replication and validation. So we launched the Rapid DX program, a public-private partnership project, to do that, to take legacy cohort data and to then analyze it together in a partnership model where everyone is bringing their data, bringing their biosamples, bringing their know-how. We work together in a consensus process to establish a statistical analysis plan for the data sets to get to the power we need to both discover and replicate and validate biomarkers in this space. This program is already been underway for a year plus, and we're starting to yield effects, results. The first major result is in genetics. Here we partnered with the PGC genetics group up in the Brody, and we partnered with the NIH. When we started this project, we had only about 5,000 cases of PTSD in a database repository to do genome-wide association studies with. Obviously, not enough cases. When you looked at the literature and you asked the question, well, where did we need to be in order to reach genome-wide significance, we looked at other parallels, schizophrenia, bipolar, major depressive disorder. How many cases do you need to see genome-wide significance? The answer was at least 25,000 cases and 50,000 controls is what we would have to have in hand in order to begin to even suggest that there was a genetic component to PTSD. In 2015, people questioned whether this was an important or useful investment of this funding. I was directly told by a senior leader in government, why are you putting money in this? This is a waste of money. This is not going to bear fruit. This is throwing cash out the door. I disagreed. I thought genetics was the fundamental foundation of understanding biology of disorders, so we pushed forward. And we decided that we would set a line in the sand and said, okay, we're going to get to that line, and we're going to do whatever it takes programmatically to accomplish the goal. We identified over 56 studies around the globe, different countries, different centers of excellence. We invited them to participate in the program. We funded 100% of all the genotyping being done and the analysis of that data. We partner with the Brody, which is a world-class organization. The Stanley Center did all of the bioassays, and in 2 years, we generated the first genome-wide significant findings for PTSD. 30,000 cases, 170,000 controls. We got the extra bang for our buck by going to the UK Biobank and partnering with them as well. And six SNPs have been identified, and the manuscript should come out this summer. The interesting part is we now know PTSD is genetic. We now know that that it was worth the investment, and that we needed many, many more cases than we thought, and we probably need many more to start looking like schizophrenia and other disorders get to 50, 100, and 200 SNPs. But we're on our way. And we've shown that the model works, that working together collaboratively, sharing knowledge, sharing the data can make a tangible difference. So this, I think, is very exciting. I asked the field, where are we with traumatic brain injury? Do we have genetics for TBI? Seth? No. So I would ask you, should this be on the roadmap? should we be doing a similar type of initiative for traumatic brain injury? And I know that there are efforts underway. Have we set a line in the sand to say how many cases do we need to get to significance? We also pushed forward on looking at response biomarkers and stratification with a group at Stanford. Amit Etkin leads this group, and he recently published in Science Translational Medicine the first fMRI-based biomarker looking at whether or not individuals will respond to psychotherapy based on the presence or absence of this particular biomarker. So this is resting state fMRI in combination with verbal memory test. If you're biomarker positive, it means that you have a disconnected circuit. An impairment in that circuitry means you do not tend to respond to psychotherapy. 30% of the population did not respond to psychotherapy. 30% of the population had this biomarker. This was early work. It needs replication, it needs independent validation. We funded that work. That work, since this original study was conducted, has already been funded and almost completed. It replicates. So you'll see those results coming out later this year as well. And that's how we approach things. We want to find robust findings and then replicate them, independently validate them, take this forward to the FDA. We met with the FDA about 3 weeks ago as well to ask what will it take to continue to develop a program like this. Finally, in the space of neuroimaging, we worked with the American College of Radiology and 3 major universities now to establish a national normative neuroimaging library. We all take for granted that we want to use imaging technologies for diagnosing individuals. But if someone walks into your emergency room with a brain trauma and you did advanced DTI on them, which today you cannot do in that context, you would not have a reference sample to know whether this is a normal finding or not. So this project, which was originally the brainchild of James Stone, Lisa Wild, and I think Dallas and others, was not funded for years. The idea had been floating around, no one was picking it up, and we finally decided that we would just support this. We've been funding this program now for 2 years. They have over 500 patients now in the database. The data will be made openly available to the research community through the Brain Commons. So we'll continue to move forward. Our target is 3,000 subjects. It needs funding. This is the kind of initiative that it requires funding from many sides, and we need to do a better job of establishing data standards and ways that we can look at neuroimaging data across centers. So this is, I think, an important effort. It's the kind of just routine, standard generating reference library, super exciting stuff that people want to talk about, but it's essential. Right? So when we ask ourselves what needs to happen next, sometimes it's really just basics. Do we have data standards? Do we have a normative library? Do we have the right tools to do the work? Do we have a place to put the data? We established the Brain Commons because there was no place for us to put data in this field. So we worked with University of Chicago. We found one of the best platforms that exists out there. This is a Gen 3 Commons, and we worked with him to advance the Brain Commons to a place where this can be used by the entire research community to share data, deep phenotype data across brain disorders. And Michael J. Fox Foundation is partnering with us, and they're putting their data here as well, and we're partnering with other foundations to start putting their data here. So ultimately, we'll be able to do cross-disease analysis in this field using the Brain Commons, which has a lot of advanced analytics capabilities fed in. This is cloud-based infrastructure, and we anticipate that everybody from the experimental casual user to the advanced machine learning engineer will be able to see some benefit in the Brain Commons and use notebooks and other tools to start driving the field forward, integrating knowledge, and pulling all of this information together that we think we need to have in order to understand the underlying biology of the disease. So that sort of gives you, for those of you who are not familiar with Cohen Bioscience, that's how we approach things. We use a strategic roadmap. We identify what needs to be done next. We invest in those areas with key partners that are best-in-class world leaders in their space, and we then make sure that we deliver those needs. And we would like to start looking at traumatic brain injury now in that vein, and we need your help to understand where should we start and how do we think about this. So with that, I want to thank you for your time in these next 2 days, your attention, and now invite our keynote, Dr. David Brody, to speak to us about one bite at a time. And I'll leave it there.